Folks, how are you doing tonight? It's a lovely evening. I'm sitting here in front of my bookshelf. We're going to talk about current events. As usual, I'll give you some introductory remarks. Then from there, I'll do my roll call. And from there, we'll answer your super chat questions, which are always appreciated. Now, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. And be sure to hit that notifications bell to make sure you get the notifications. Always good to do that. And let's just do what we got to do, folks. Let's have our conversation. I'm glad I'm with you. My energy is returning. In the last few weeks, I've been exercising more, been eating some better food, than I usually do, trying to get my energy level back up. For some reason, I've been drowsy and tired lately. Probably the curse of working from home, right? The pandemic, COVID-19, quarantine, lockdown, stay home curse. It just kind of makes you want to go, ugh. Well, I'm trying my best to get my energies back up. I'm going out and running every day, eating a better diet than I had been, and hopefully I'll be joining you a lot more. I don't know why my energy has been shot. Perhaps it's been the changes in the weather. It's getting a little cooler here in New York. My hope is that I'll be with you a lot more often in the coming weeks, and I'm glad to be with you all here tonight. It's always a pleasure to interact with all of you. We are a community here. We care about each other. We have familiar faces. We know each other. When I do that roll call, a lot of the same night, a lot of the same names. We know each other. We have something special going on here. So let's keep it alive. I'm trying to get my energy level up. Red salute during the Paris Commune. All right, we'll talk about it. Folks, I want to start out by talking about a very, very serious situation. Kenosha, Wisconsin. Jacob Blake, African-American man. The police open fire on him in front of his children. He's paralyzed. Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. The police union is trying to say somehow this was okay, like they always do. But there's no way anyone looking at that video could feel like what happened there was okay. Like this father, being almost killed. It's surprising he did not die, but paralyzed in front of his children, for goodness sakes. This is horrendous stuff. All right? George Floyd, it's been 6 years since the killing of Eric Garner here in New York City, Staten Island. Folks, there's something happening. Because I can guarantee you, there are a number of politicians, a number of police chiefs even, from Democratic and Republican constituencies, who've seen all the big protests happening and said, can we just keep it under control? Can we stop this? Can we just calm things down? But it hasn't happened, right? Police killings, wrongful taking of the lives of African-American men primarily, has continued. It has continued. And the reason that it continues is because this is part of a process. My age. Because this is part of a process. Folks, there's a very, very important novel in U.S. history called The Grapes of Wrath. And I actually would recommend you read The Grapes of Wrath. I know we read it in school. I didn't actually read it when I was assigned it in school, but in college, during the financial crisis, I went and revisited it. The Grapes of Wrath, a very, very powerful novel by John Steinbeck. And it's a Marxist novel. It's very influenced by Marxism. It references Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin in one particularly bold sentence. And, at the time that he wrote it, John Steinbeck was a fellow traveler of the Communist Party, USA. And there's one particular story in that book that kind of points to what's happening with police brutality in the United States right now. And, you know, the way the Grapes of Wrath is set up, it's like one chapter is about the family, the Joad family that are the protagonists. The next chapter is kind of an essay or a little sketch or an anecdote that makes a political point. The next essay in the next chapter is about the Joad family. Well, one of the sketches that John Steinbeck presents in The Grapes of Wrath goes like this. The story is that there's a farmer, and he has just had his farm foreclosed on. And the tractor has come to knock his home over and to drive him off the land. And so the tractor is there to knock down his land. And this farmer is out there with his gun, his shotgun, his rifle, whatever. And he's standing there and he says, you're not gonna take my home, says to the man in the tractor. You're not gonna knock over my home. You do, I'll shoot you. The man on the tractor comes down and he says, you know, shooting me isn't going to make much of a difference. You shoot me, they'll come arrest you for murder, and then they'll send another guy along and he'll knock down your home. And he says, all right. He says, so who should I shoot? Should I go shoot the judge who sent you? And the guy says, no, you know, the judge was just kind of enforcing the law. And, you know, like I said, if it wasn't that judge, it would probably be another judge who would have ordered me to come and, you know, knock down your home and evict you from this property. And the guy says, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to shoot the banker. I'm going to find the local banker who made the decision to file for foreclosure. I'm going to find him. I'm going to shoot him. The guy says, well, you know, that guy's just kind of a functionary, right? I mean, he's just a guy. He's just a local guy who runs a bank. You know, if you shoot him, the bank's going to find another guy to come to this area and be the local bank operator, the guy who approves loans and files foreclosures and things like that. So you wouldn't do that. So the guy says, well, maybe I'm going to go to New York City, where the bank's headquarters are, the big headquarters of the bank on Wall Street. I'm going to go in and find the guy who owns the bank. I'm going to shoot him. And the guy says, well, you know, you might be able to do that. But the thing is, banks aren't really owned by one guy. I mean, there's a lot of shareholders, and it's a whole corporation. You can't shoot a bank, right? A bank is kind of an institution. And the farmer is sitting there on the brink of losing his home that he probably built himself. This is like Dust Bowl, Oklahoma stuff. And he's saying, who do I shoot? Who do I shoot? And the point of the story, the point that John Steinbeck is making in The Grapes of Wrath when he tells that anecdote, is that the problem is not individuals. The problem is the system. The reason that farmers across Oklahoma and places like that lost their farms during the Great Depression was not because of one bad person. It was a systemic crisis. It was the profit system, the mode of production for profit, grinding ahead with its ruthless processes that drove millions of Americans into unemployment lines and into poverty and into bread lines and into starvation and to flee their homes during the Great Depression. Well, I'm telling you right now, yes, these police officers should absolutely be held accountable to the full extent of the law for what they are doing. That's not the point. I'm not trying to alleviate them of the blame at all. They are responsible for what they're doing. They need to be prosecuted. They need to be charged. They need to charge the police for what they're doing. But why is this happening? Why does it seem that in the United States, the grinding wheels of repression, police authority, racism, why is this happening? What is going on here? What is happening here? What is the story? Why is this happening? And why is it that now, with an election coming up, with protests in the streets, the political leaders can't just go to the cops and say, can you chill it out, guys? Can you just stop it for the moment? Can you wait for things to calm down a little bit? Why can't they do that? Why can't they do that? Why are things rolling ahead? Well, the reason is because this is rooted in the economic crisis. There is an economic base to all of this. It is not simply a matter of one bad cop, one cop who has racial bias, one cop who disregards people's lives. That's certainly a factor. But underlying it is the breakdown of the capitalist system. Folks, since the late 70s, early 80s, living standards in this country for average working people have been deteriorating. Good-paying industrial jobs have been vanishing. Wages have been declining. Living standards have been declining. The rate of household debt has been rising. The cost of getting a college education has been rising. Working people across this country have been feeling the crunch since the 1980s. Since the early 1980s, late 1970s. There has been an erosion in the living standard of average Americans. Incomes have decreased. Spending power has decreased. The rate of debt has gone up. The rate of insecurity has gone up. And of course, the black community were hit the hardest first, right? The factories left the urban centers first. They left other parts of this country that were deindustrialized later. But first, the urban centers were the first places for the factories to leave. Detroit, very viciously hit. Motor City, right? The factories left Detroit long before they left other parts of the country, right? The home foreclosure crisis, right? I was in Detroit in 2008. They had been having home foreclosures throughout that city for 2-3 years. They'd had an epidemic of home foreclosures. But around the time Obama was coming into office, all throughout the country they were happening. All throughout the country they were happening. What hit the black community first spread everywhere, right? They talk about the black community being the first fired and the last hired, right? And that is the situation, right? So the black community starts getting hit harder than anybody else by austerity. And yes, the white community, the white working class, catches up. Yeah, they start getting rid of other people's jobs. Wages and living standards start declining. You go to, white suburban neighborhoods, pretty soon nowadays you're going to see empty foreclosed homes. So living standards are dropping. The conditions that give people a comfortable life are decreasing. Meanwhile, military spending is increasing, and incarceration is increasing. The mass incarceration movement, locking people up, longer sentences. The prison population in the United States from the 1980s and the 1990s skyrocketed. Huge increases in states like California, in states like Minnesota. We saw the rate of incarceration increase, longer sentences, lock them up, 3 strikes laws, right? There was a guy in California, very famous story. There was a guy in California who, if you get convicted of a felony, your third felony, no matter what it is, automatic 25 years. There was a man in California, his third strike was allegedly cheating on his driver's ed test to get his driver's license. Now, is that crime worth 25 years in prison? Well, California, it was automatic. The judge had no choice. 3 strike law, 25 years. Our prisons start filling up with people. Meanwhile, our local police departments, they get involved in buying military equipment. The Pentagon starts unloading its excess weaponry on police departments. So at the same time, living standards are dropping. Conditions are getting worse. People are being driven further and further into poverty. Incarceration is increasing. People are getting locked up far more than they used to. I mean, things happen that are just wrong. I remember when I was living in Cleveland, if I recall correctly, there was a case, this was, maybe 10 years ago. There was a case of a woman in a suburban area, an African-American woman, and there was a deer in her front yard. A male deer, a buck, with big antlers. And her kids were in the front yard. She was nervous about this big deer being in her front yard with its big antlers, being near her children. And something wasn't right. Usually animals run away from people. But she shouted at the deer. It didn't move. So she took her shovel, hoping to protect her kids. She took her shovel and she whacked the deer on the head, hoping that would scare it away and it would run away. Killed the deer. Went to prison. Hunting without a license. Give me a break. I mean, anything. Locking people up. There was a time in this country where we weren't as excited to lock people up. Yes, we've had a criminal justice system that can be very vicious. But, there was a time in this country where the goal of every situation with police, with courts, was not lock them up. It wasn't the goal of every possible situation. There was a hope that we could avoid putting bodies in jails. But the rise of the prison industrial complex, the grinding poverty, the economic benefits, corporations making money, prisons for profit, groups like GEO Group, Corrections Corporation of America, Wells Fargo Bank, that are basically making money from locking people in jail, states that have actually private prisons that are run by private companies, not the government. We have all kinds of private companies contracted by prisons to do all kinds of things. There's an economic incentive to lock people in jail. Living standards are dropping. Plus, there's another economic incentive to start arming up all the local police forces like Rambo and give them all kinds of military and hardware and weapons they don't need. This is all a process that's rolling on ahead as living standards are getting worse, as people are suffering. There's also a huge increase in the mechanisms of repression. And it's at a point where they can't control it any longer. You can talk about the fact that a lot of these police departments are trained in Israel. Right? You won't see that in American media very much. All the talk about police brutality, they're not going to tell you. Many police departments around the country are actually trained in Israel. And they work with the Israeli police. But you have to remember, the Israeli police are training the police officers they work with not about how to work with other Israelis. They're teaching American police departments the kind of policing tactics they use against Palestinians, right? They're the crowd control tactics, the beating people up. And so a lot of our police departments are being trained in Israel. They're being trained by the Israeli police, not to work with protesters, of their own nationality, but instead about how to contain the crowd of others, the other people, the problematic people, how to contain the Palestinians. That's what they're being told how to do. So, of course, our cops are learning to be more vicious, and you give them a whole bunch of weapons, and then on top of that, you make greater instability in society, you drop people's living standards. This is all the natural wheels of capitalism moving onward. And I think that there are people, honestly, Trump is doubling down and siding with the police, giving horrendous speeches to police officers' unions, trying to do the whole Blue Lives Matter thing. But at the same time, I think Donald Trump is probably thinking, I wish this could stop. I wish they could just stop. Joe Biden, a lot of Democrats, a lot of local officials, they're all saying, why can't we stop this? We can't stop this. Because this is the grinding wheels of capitalism. You get rid of all the good-paying jobs. You build a prison-for-profit apparatus. You arm the police with RoboCop weapons. You send the police to Israel to get their training. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. They want to stop it. It's gotten out of control. The protests are crazy. The whole country realizes that this has got to stop. They realize the way things are moving is unacceptable. This can't go on. They know this, but they can't stop it. Now we understand now, not only did this horrendous police shooting that left this man disabled, shooting him in front of his children, not only did this happen, not disabled, paralyzed, left this man paralyzed in front of his children, not only did that happen in Kenosha, Wisconsin, but now we understand that somebody went to a protest against police brutality and opened fire and killed protesters. Folks, things in this country are spiraling out of control. They are completely spiraling out of control. And again, it's very easy. It would be very, very easy to just say, it's this guy. But we're back to John Steinbeck. We're back to the guy standing in front of the tractor with his shotgun saying, who do I shoot? It's not one local cop that set up this situation. It's not one elected official. It's not one president. It's not one administration. Not one bank. Not one corporation. This is a systemic problem. And our country is facing a meltdown right now, an economic and political meltdown because of a systemic problem. Capitalism is in crisis. And on that note, folks, I want to talk about the Republican National Convention. Oh boy, we just sat through the Democratic National infomercial. I found it to be quite dull, but now we're watching the Republican National infomercial, which I find equally dull. But I wanted to react a little more specifically to the Republican Convention, because the Republican Convention disturbs me more than the Democratic Convention does. The Democratic Convention disturbed me in the fact that Republicans were prominently featured, the fact that that progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were kind of marginalized and not highlighted. The fact that it seemed like a rally to defend the establishment, I was disturbed by the Democratic National Convention, But the Republican Convention is disturbing me much more. But it's disturbing me because it's complicated. The Democratic Convention's message was Donald Trump is causing a whole bunch of problems, and he's an enemy of the American establishment, and get him out, and things will go back to normal. It'll be America like you used to know it. That's the message of the Democrat Convention. The message of the Republican Convention is very, very complicated. In some ways, it's appealing to better parts of people. But in many other ways, it's far more sinister. Far more sinister than the Democratic Convention. Folks, a lot of the tone of the Republican Convention, I agree with. It's just the content I vehemently disagree with. A lot of the tone, especially some of the more fiery speeches at the Republican Convention, is there's a group of rich people that are getting wealthier while your life is getting more. We're going to rise up against them. I agree, right? That these wars, did you see Rand Paul's speech about these wars are being waged around the world and they're no good and Donald Trump is more anti-war and that's a good thing? I can't disagree with that. I think that they're not representing Trump's record correctly. Donald Trump escalated with Venezuela. Donald Trump escalated with Iran. Donald Trump is ripping up, key nuclear agreements. And I mean, Donald Trump's not doing it, but they're at least appealing to people's desire to end the wars. But the content is nuts, right? According to one of the speeches, California is communist. That's why so many people there are poor. Right? That's why there's so much homeless there. They're communists. They're socialists. That's nuts. We got to deregulate everything. That's nuts. Right? Police brutality protesters are un-American. No, that's nuts. The content is nuts. The content is wrong. The content is wildly wrong. But it's appealing to the part of people that's mad at the establishment. It's appealing to the part of people that wants to rebel. It's appealing to the anger within people at how the country is deteriorating. It's just feeding them. It's feeding them a message that is completely wrong, and it's advocating policies that will make it worse. Folks, I felt a particular need to respond to the speech of Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. Mike Pompeo is probably the worst individual within the Trump administration, in my opinion. He is a warmonger. He is a fanatic. He wants war with a passion. He wants to tear down, to kill, and destroy. And he should not have given a speech at the Republican Convention. The U.S. Secretary of State does not speak at party conventions because he represents the State Department. But yet, Mike Pompeo spoke at the Republican Convention. And this fits in exactly with an extreme trend. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump has been doing these daily press briefings, which instead of updating on the fight to coronavirus, we hear about why we shouldn't vote for Joe Biden. He's using his press briefings as political advertisement. Folks, there's an escalation going on, right? They're pushing the envelope of how much they can fight with each other. The gentlemen's agreements between factions in the ruling class are being ripped up. Right? The ruling class are getting much more down and dirty when they fight with each other. Bonapartism, the fight among capitalists, the struggle for one faction of the capitalist class to violently seize power and suppress other sections in the hopes of staving off a crisis. The level of Bonapartism is very extreme. And, when you break these rules, you can expect the other side to break the rules as well. I know Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. But in reality, when they go low, you go low, and then they go lower, and then you go lower, and then you go lower, and then they go lower. That's what happens, right? When you rip up these kind of gentlemanly agreements among the ruling class, things get uglier and uglier and uglier. Uglier and uglier and uglier. Uglier and uglier and uglier. And, now the Secretary of State should not have been speaking at a Republican convention. He speaks. And what does he say? First of all, he begins his speech by basically taunting the fact that he's not supposed to be speaking at the Republican convention, but he's doing it, right? Yeah, I mean, you got to love this. He starts out by saying, I have a big job as Susan and Nick's dad. Ha ha ha. I mean, you all know I'm the Secretary of State, but I'm not allowed to speak here as the Secretary of State. I have a big job as Susan and Nick's dad. Ha 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 ha. I'm violating the norms of U.S. politics. I'm taking the U.S. State Department in a blatantly partisan direction. Ha 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 ha. But remember, I'm just here as my kid's dad, right? I'm going to spend my whole speech talking about U.S. foreign policy and such. But yeah, I mean, he's laughing about it. He's flaunting years of precedent. Right? Is he breaking the law? Probably not. But you have to understand, you escalate this, one thing leads to another. So he starts out taunting, basically taunting the audience, taunting the Democrats, taunting everyone who objected to him speaking at the Republican convention by talking that way. Next on the line, he says, quote, China was, quote, covering up the China virus and allowing it to spread death and destruction. Where in the world are they getting this? Where in the world are they getting this? Where in the world are they getting this? China got COVID-19 before anybody else. Didn't go to any other country, as far as we know, except for China. China was the first to really have a major outbreak, and they alerted the world about it. And then they started doing all kinds of investigations, and they locked down. And what did our media do about it? Our media, you'll remember, described it as horrendous authoritarianism. Oh my God, China is not letting people go outside. It's hot. I mean, they described what China was doing like it was awful. Donald Trump banned flights to the country from China, and U.S. media castigated him for it. Oh, Trump's being crazy. He's being xenophobic. You'll remember, China started sending aid all over the world. China is a major source of protective equipment, protective gear, gloves, masks. China's been working with the world. China has given billions of dollars to countries around the world. They set up a health Silk Road with Italy. They set up a health Silk Road. But somehow, this fiction is being promoted by Mike Pompeo and others, that somehow, despite the fact that China got it before anybody, despite the fact that without any warning, China was able to swing into motion and deal with it, the fact that now movie theaters are open in China, folks, people are going to the box office again in China. China's economy is speeding ahead, folks. While we're crashing and burning, their economy is growing again. But somehow we are to believe that the fallout, the economic fallout of this crisis, which they warned us about and we ignored, is all their fault, right? China was warning us about COVID-19. And our politicians were assuring us, do you remember? Our politicians were assuring us that everything was going to be okay. And then in the back room, they were selling their stocks and betting against the stock market. Dianne Feinstein, look it up. Look up what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They knew it was going to be this bad, but they were telling us up front, everything's going to be fine. Everything will be okay. It's all going to be okay. They knew it wasn't going to be okay. China was telling us everything wasn't going to be okay. Our media condemned China's lockdowns as authoritarian. Donald Trump was condemned for barring flights from China. Oh, but it's China's fault. China didn't warn us. No, I think our media didn't warn us. They continue, it's wild, they continue to push crazy conspiracy theories, right? Saying that somehow the virus is like a chemical weapon or something from China. This is nuts. Right? I mean, it's absolutely nuts. China has very effectively responded to COVID-19. The U.S. government has fallen on its face, but somehow we're supposed to blame China for the U.S. government falling on its face. Unbelievable. Next, in his speech, he says, quote, because of Trump, he says, quote, Ukraine has defensive weapon systems. Okay. Folks, the USA has been arming, propping up, supplying with deadly weapons and all kinds of weapons, a fanatically anti-Russian government in Ukraine. Right? 2014, you'll remember, there was the whole Euromaidan event. Billions of US dollars were given to people to go out and protest and burn things. The elected government was toppled. And they put in this fanatically anti-Russian government in Ukraine. World War II monuments are being destroyed and have been destroyed. There's been talk of outlawing the Russian language in schools. This fanatically anti-Russian government was installed by the Obama-Biden administration in 2014. And, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, got some pretty good kickbacks from that. Look into the details, You're not allowed to say that, apparently, but that's the fact. If you look at that what went on with Burisma Holdings. Very good opportunities were created for Joe Biden's son, even though he knows nothing about natural gas and has no experience in Ukraine. Angola. Meanwhile, the United States is, propping up and arming this far right-wing extremist government in Ukraine, ultranationalists, right? So this government comes in Ukraine, and the USA is arming them to the teeth, and he refers to it as defensive weapons systems. Well, folks, imagine that there was a Russian-aligned government in Mexico. Okay? Just imagine that there was a Russian-aligned government in Mexico. And then Russia went to Mexico and started giving that Russian-aligned government in Mexico huge stockpiles of weapons. Now, would that be de-escalation? Would that be just defensive? Come on. We know what's happening here, right? A government was toppled. A fanatically anti-Russian government was installed. Meanwhile, now the United States is pouring huge amounts of weapons and funding and covert support and overt support onto a government in Ukraine that is fanatically anti-Russian. Is that the kind of thing that's going to bring peace to the world? I don't think so. Next. They're doing it now in Belarus, let me add, right? They're trying to topple the government of Belarus, destabilize Belarus, and they want to do the same thing. They want to install a fanatically anti-Russian government in Belarus and then start arming it and giving it weapons. But somehow we're supposed to believe that it's Russian aggression. Chile's crisis. Then he goes from there, Mike Pompeo. He said that the United States has left a harmful treaty so our nation can build missiles to deter Russian aggression. Yeah, so basically, the INF treaty, some very, very important international agreements that de-escalated the Cold War, that prevented the arms race, that stopped the arms race, have been ripped up. So now we get to build more nukes and force Russia into a situation where they might have to build more nukes. They claim Russia has violated the agreement. They don't put forward any evidence to back up that claim. It's shocking, right? They're entering a new arms race. The Clear Skies Agreement has gone as well. They're entering a new arms race, escalating international tensions. But we're supposed to believe somehow they're de-escalating, they're creating peace. Sounds to me like they're driving us even closer to war. Pompeo in Sudan. But then the icing on the cake. It's just like he's lying, he's being deceptive, he's misrepresenting facts, but then towards the end, he just gets really, the lies start really coming out towards the end of the speech. Mike Pompeo says, quote, that Qasem Soleimani, who Trump killed, was, quote, the man most responsible for the murder and maiming of thousands of American soldiers and thousands of Christians across the Middle East. Qasem Soleimani was a leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran protected Christians in Syria. It was the US-backed Wahhabi extremists who were slaughtering Christians in Syria, whom Qasem Soleimani was fighting against. I've been to Iran, folks. I went to church on Sunday morning in Tehran, to a lovely Armenian Christian church. Qasem Soleimani was not killing Christians. In Iraq, where Christians are a religious minority, he fought against the Wahhabi extremists who were targeting Shia, his religion, and Christians. In Syria, he fought against the Wahhabi extremists who were targeting Christians and killing them. Qasem Soleimani was not going around killing Christians. That's the allies of the Saudis. That's the people supported by the United States throughout the region. That's the people, that's the Wahhabi fanatics that were doing that. You know, Iran has far more religious freedom for Christians than Saudi Arabia does, than a lot of the US-aligned regimes around that region do. Qasem Soleimani was not going around killing Christians. Furthermore, Qasem Soleimani, I'm not convinced he was responsible for killing US troops. I'm not convinced of that either. The IEDs and roadside bombs that were planted in Iraq tended to be planted by Wahhabi extremist groups. That doesn't add up either. So I'm not buying that one. Not buying it, right? And in fact, the United States and Iran, have tried to cooperate. Many of the governments in Iran since the U.S. invasion have been Shia, governments and have been aligned with Iran and have had developed good relations with Iran. I really don't believe Qasem Soleimani was driving around Iran planting bombs to kill U.S. troops. In fact, in Afghanistan, which also borders Iran, Qasem Soleimani cooperated with the United States and with the United States military efforts in the country. So it's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, Soleimani was protecting Christians, not killing them. Soleimani was not going around killing U.S. troops. If anything, he was trying to establish good relations between the Iraqi government, which was hosting the troops, and the government of Iran. So it doesn't make any sense. In Afghanistan, he even cooperated with U.S. troops. So he's just lying. Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, who should not have even been speaking at that convention, was lying. But it gets even better, right? He can't even end the speech without a couple more lies. So from there, he says, because of Trump, ISIS is wiped out. Do folks not remember Russia bombing the hell out of ISIS and how the United States, objected very, very loudly to Russia doing that? Do folks not remember Russia going in with the support of the Syrian government to support the Syrian government in crushing ISIS? Did that all just slipped out of their mind? Didn't happen? Folks remember how the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran fought ISIS on the battlefield? Do folks remember how Hezbollah fought against ISIS? Do folks remember that ISIS started out as a faction among the pro-U.S. forces in Syria? That the trucks that they were driving just happened to be trucks that the Obama administration had provided the Syrian rebels with? That many of the Syrian rebels who were trained by the U.S. government, armed by the U.S. government, ended up joining ISIS? But because of Trump, ISIS was defeated. No, I think ISIS was defeated because of the Syrian Arab army, because of Russia, because of Iran, because of Hezbollah. Just saying. But no. Trump did it all himself. And on top of that, he says the USA has exited from what he calls the disastrous nuclear deal. Right, yeah, Iran signed that nuclear deal, made huge concessions at the negotiating table, basically gave up the majority of their peaceful nuclear energy program, and now has been stabbed in the back. And hope for any reconciliation between the United States and Iran is basically gone at this point, especially after the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Somehow that's a good thing, right? And he then talks about the historic United Arab Emirates-Israel deal. Right, so basically, Mike Pompeo has gone around the world escalating international tensions in the hopes of making lots of money for weapons manufacturers. This is unbelievable, right? We know why Israel and the United Arab Emirates are having relations now. And it's not because Trump cut a great deal to protect Palestinians. It's because they're trying to unify Israel and the U.S.-aligned Arab autocracies in a fight against Iran, right? Trump said that was his goal in the Middle East, to create an Arab NATO. This is about fighting Iran. That's all it's about. It is an anti-Iran deal. And yes, oh, wow, an Arab country recognized Israel. It's been revealed that Saudi and Israeli intelligence have been working together against Iran for quite a while sometimes. So, they both buy their weapons from the same place. Israel's weapons come from the United States, and so do Saudi Arabia's. So give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, Mike Pompeo wants a new Cold War. He wants a new Cold War against China. He wants a new Cold War against Russia. He wants a new Cold War, especially against Iran. And he is looking to unleash chaos and death and destruction all over the world. And he's telling lots of lies in order to do it. Mike Pompeo is probably the most dangerous figure within the Trump administration, right? And we know Mike Pompeo's activities. Who are they serving? Well, people like Betsy DeVos, whose brother just happens to be Eric Prince of Blackwater Academy, military contractors, right? Private military contractors are not only in the Middle East at this point, not only in Africa. We've got private military contractors on our streets going after protesters. Very scary stuff. Very, very scary stuff. Mike Pompeo. Very, very, very scary and dangerous man. But folks, like I said, the Republican convention was the most disturbing convention because the tone was right in many ways, right? The wars are not good, right? We don't need a new war, right? I mean, and you know, the way Trump was hailed by Rand Paul and others as somebody who was not getting us into wars, you know, they didn't even try to say that about Joe Biden because Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War. He supported U.S. military interventions. They didn't even try to say that with him. You know, the way they're talking about the situation in the country is unacceptable. We need to I mean, the tone is great. The message is nuts. The message is absolutely nuts. It's opposing people's right to protest against police brutality. They had that couple who pointed guns at protesters, you know, and they had them on there like they were heroes. I mean, the Republican convention has been absolutely disgusting. But at the same time, it's appealing to the righteous anger of a lot of working people. It's appealing to anti-establishment sentiments. Meanwhile, the Democratic Convention, what's the Democratic Convention doing? The Democratic Convention is basically a defense of the establishment. We'll go back to normal. This isn't the America we know. I know. We're going to restore America's role in the world, increase international tension. I mean, it's, you know, Trump is a demagogue. Trump is causing us to distrust mainstream media. It's disgusting, folks. I've told you before I don't support either candidate, and I will re-emphasize once again that I do not support either candidate. I do not support either candidate. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you because that would ruin my objectivity. But I honestly don't support either candidate. I look at them both. They both sicken me in their own way. It's not it's not the same evil in different doses. It's different evil. Trump, Pompeo, Betsy DeVos, the Koch brothers, that's one form of evil. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, that's another form of evil. There's, you know, globalist, social engineering, you know, ultra-rich, managerial evil. And there's war profiteering, bigoted, hateful, authoritarian, racist evil. I would like to not vote for evil. You know, I mean, we're in a period, the capitalists are fighting among each other because the rate of profit is dropping. Folks, before I start answering your questions, I wanted to just go over one of my pet peeves. My pet peeves about leftist circles. Because, all right, we'll talk about that book. Let me just write it down. Folks, one of my greatest pet peeves with the mainstream U.S. left is that there's this atmosphere created where you're not allowed to know anything. You can't talk about facts, right? We know Ben Shapiro, awful right-wing guy, has this whole thing, facts don't care about your feelings. Well, Ben Shapiro's facts are often very, very wrong, but he's right in a way. He's right in a way. Because the left has this rule that you're not allowed to talk about facts. And it is a big pet peeve of mine. The synthetic left, the woke internet left, the Twitter mobs, the rad libs, people call them, they have this belief that you're not allowed to talk about facts. Great example. I'll give you many examples of this. It's been a long-standing pet peeve of mine, right? Do you folks remember at one point Alex Jones and the far right wing were talking about FEMA camps? It's like, oh, Barack Obama's going to put us all in FEMA camps. We're all going to be put in prison camps by Obama. Oh, FEMA camps. And then they would actually pull up a law. They'd say, don't you know there's a law, the Mccarran Act of 1951. They're going to put us all in prison camps. Well, let's talk about facts. Is there a law called the Mccarran Internal Security Act of 1951? Yes. And the Mccarran Internal Security Act of 1951 was an anti-communist law passed amid McCarthyism. And it said that in a time of national emergency, the U.S. State Department would have a list, the U.S. Department of Justice, I believe, would have a list of 2 million subversives and communists who would be put in camps. That's what the law was. It was to be used against the left, and the courts overturned it, mind you. It was later in the late 50s, as McCarthyism was thawing, they overturned it. So is Alex Jones pointing to a true thing? Yes. Is he completely misrepresenting it? Yes. But I remember when I got an email from the Southern Poverty Law Center listing the top right-wing lies. One of them was FEMA camps. No such law exists. No camps were ever created. It's all a big lie. No, it's a real law. And there were actual camps that were set up. But the law was to be used against leftists and communists, number one. Number two, the law was overturned by the courts. But there's something real there. And the response of liberals, though, Southern Poverty Law Center, Media Matters, oh, this is just right-wing propaganda. It's all made up. You're not allowed to know anything. You're not allowed to know any facts. You're not allowed to, you just have to, no, facts, no. Another example. You know, right-wingers on the internet, I think some of these anonymous people, they have a meme now to attack the LGBT community. They talk about LGBTP, P being pedophile. And they try to make it look like the gay rights movement supports pedophilia, which they don't, right? It's an awful homophobic slur, right? And this isn't a long-standing thing. Conservatives have long said, oh, what, if we legalize being gay, next we're going to legalize pedophilia. Long-standing slur, right? It's a nasty, nasty thing. You know, people growing up, a lot of people that I went to school with would say things like pedophiles and gays, or all gays are pedophiles. It's a long-standing homophobic slur on the LGBT community. That's a reality, and fighting against it is a good thing. But was there a time, decades ago, where unfortunately NAMBLA was allowed at gay pride marches? Yes. And why did that happen? Why was there a tolerance for them in the past? We're talking, I think, 1993, even in the 80s, they banned pedophiles from gay gatherings. But why was there somewhat of a tolerance for them in the 60s and 70s at gay pride parades? It's because of the fact that there was a big problem with the fact that many young gay men were molested. And many young gay men had, in their mind, some kind of confusion around that issue. And when in the 90s, the gay rights movement came to the consensus that we don't want NAMBLA around, we don't want them around, they have nothing to do with us, that was a great thing. And it showed that because of the gay rights movement, there was enough awareness around that issue. There was enough awareness around that issue that they could differentiate, and that changed. But did this happen? Yes, it happened. And the fact that it happened is deeply tragic. The tragic circumstances facing young LGBT people in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I mean, it was awful. To be gay, gay nowadays, everybody knows about gay people. There's gay people on TV, there's gay people everywhere, right? But back then, that was not the case. And so, because of that, there was a lot of confusion. And there were some prominent LGBT activists like Allen Ginsberg and Harry Hay who made very problematic statements. And it's very sad. And the gay rights movement now has corrected that issue, and it's a good thing. But you're not allowed to know that. You just have to shout homophobe at anyone who brings this up. No, it's an important issue. This happened, and the gay community got over that. And the confusion in the gay community went away because homophobia was eroded. Now, kids who are growing up, They know they're gay. They don't think they're the only gay kid in the world. I mean, it's a victory, and it shows that homophobia has been defeated. And when there was confusion around that issue, that was the result of the tragic reality of homophobia. But you're not allowed to know that. No, you're just supposed to, and that's the way these things are. Even the way I just talked on there. I opened my live talking about Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I talked about the police state. And I talked about what is driving the escalation of repression here in the United States. I talked about it. I talked about the economy. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to know anything in left-wing circles. You have to be stupid. You have to just be stupid. You just emotionally scream whatever the trendy slogan is. That's what you're expected to do, right? I'm talking about why political repression is increasing. I'm talking about why it's targeting the black community the most. I'm talking about why the government officials who probably wish it could be de-escalated can't de-escalate it. But no, you can't do that. This is stupid know-nothingism. Stupid know-nothingism. Right? You're not allowed to know facts. You're not allowed to know history. You're not allowed to know details. Just whatever the trendy liberal slogan is, you just repeat it. And you know, these people think that they've won an argument if they can throw a slur at you. Right? I mean, it's classic, right? You know, if you call a right-winger racist, they don't care. I'm just telling you, that is a fact, right? They may very well be racist. A lot of right-wingers are very racist. But if you just say to them, you're a racist, you have accomplished nothing. But if you can dissect what they're saying, show how it is racist, show how it's not accurate, you have accomplished something. But if you do that, you're a big fat nerd, right? You're not allowed to know anything. The know-nothingism of the woke liberal mobs ultimately serves imperialism because they don't want this system to change. They don't want people to understand why things are happening the way that they are happening. They don't want people to understand that we can have socialism and we can have a society where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. They don't want people to understand it. They just want emotions, lots of emotions. Ah, you're racist, you're sexist, you're not allowed to know anything. Facts are off limits. And if you know facts, you're a big nerd face. You're a big nerd face. Only nerds read books. Well, I'm sorry. Facts, details, information, these things are rather important. Logical arguments, history, economics, politics, these things are rather important. If we're actually going to get out of the crisis that we're in the United States right now, it's not going to come from woke, liberal, emotions, right? It's good that people are outraged about injustice. Good people are protesting. Good people are in the streets. But that in and of itself is not going to get us out of this mess. Meanwhile, racism and Trumpism and, you know, all that demagogy we're seeing at the RNC, that certainly isn't going to get us out of the crisis. In order to get out of this crisis, we need a scientific understanding of how society works. We need dialectical and historical materialism. And that is what I am trying my hardest to promote and explain with my work on these lives. I'm glad you all are here to enjoy the show. And on that note, folks, names and locations. Who is with me today? I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Domestic workers who are dependent on proletarians. Oh, okay. Let me write that down, folks. That's actually an important question. Okay, alrighty. And names and locations. I see Mississippi, Mr. Anderson. Colin from Alaska. Springfield, Missouri. Edinburgh, John Smith. Sami in the UK. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York is with us. Julian from Tours in France. Jamestown, New York. Rochester. Fairhope, Alabama. Apollo Round Mountain. Albany, New York. Matt from Florida. Larry Chavista is in Albany, New York. Chan in Georgia. Haley. Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Matthew in Melbourne. Corona, California. Portland, Oregon. Fairhope, Alabama. Red Baron from Iran. Berlin. Dario from Belgium. Boogie Down, Bronx. Andrea, Indonesia, Fountain Incorporated, Fountain Inn, Thailand, Arkansas, Heathrow, Germany, New Jersey, Frankfurt, Germany, Kenny from Malaysia, Belize, ILWU Local 13, Wilmington, California, San Diego, Leipzig, East Germany, Dan from Iran, haven't seen you in ages, says Alex. Hello from Norway, Kevin from Buffalo, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, shout out. 10,000 Lakes, Minnesota. Tampa, Florida, Herb Bryant. Vallejo, California. England, Miami. Hello from the UK. Alex from Montville, New Jersey. Mohsen from Iran. Hull, England. Ellie from California. Queens, New York City. Leipzig. Newcastle. Northern California. Los Angeles. Poe in Pomona, California. Or Mo in Pomona, California. Sam Levin in Los Angeles. Liverpool, UK, Salt Lake City, JT24 from Mississippi, Dante in Weaverville, greetings from Peru, Orlando Rando, New Orleans, Huey Long. There we go, folks. Great times, great times, great times, folks. Before I jump in to the super chats, I want to say how frustrated I am that we can't be having events and building the Center for Political Innovation. Folks, in April, I rented out a hotel. A lot of money was spent. What else did I do in April? I paid a camera crew that was going to record the whole thing. I paid for the plane ticket of the event manager and some others. I spent a lot of money on promotion. I spent a lot of money on leaflets and such. A lot of money was spent to try and make this conference to launch the Center for Political Innovation happen. And then the pandemic happened and we had to call it off. And that was very, very frustrating for me. And I understand it's frustrating for all of you as well. And trust me, folks, I've been trying to make the best of this situation. I wrote the book about Kamala Harris. It'll probably be out next week. It's with the layout person now. The proofreader sent it back to me. I went over it. We got a beautiful cover that's designed. Shout out to the person who designed the cover. Great work. The layout guy is working on it. Shout out to him if he's watching. It'll be out shortly. We put out the Green Book by Gaddafi with an introduction explaining our kind of the Center for Political Innovation's unique view of socialism. And I want to get us going, folks. I know people are frustrated. And I know people have donated money. And people are frustrated that we're not seeing the conference coming. And I'm reassuring everyone it'll happen. We are going to launch the Center for Political Innovation one way or another. We have to do it. It must be done. No one else talks the way we talk. No one else is putting out the message that we are putting out. We have to do it. We have to do it. And we will do it. And I'm frustrated, and you're frustrated, and I'm stir crazy, and you're stir crazy. And we're all looking at the political conventions that are happening right now in the country, and we want to puke. We want to puke. They're so awful. But I urge you to do what I'm urging myself to do every day. Be patient. Be patient. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. We are going to spin ahead. We're going to move forward. If you want to keep supporting us, please do. If you want to become a patron, on Saturday I'm going to do another live for patrons only. So it's below if you want to become a patron and become a sustainer of our activities. We are going to break out of this, Corona streaming, stay-at-home internet stuff. We got some books coming out. That's not enough. We need to start having events in locations. We need to start doing stuff. We need to start moving ahead. We need to start building a community, an organization that is sustainable, that is growing, that is educating people about socialism. It's not a new party. We're not forming a new party. We're not playing that game. This is an organization that people in different groups can be part of, that provides education to people all throughout U.S. society, both the politicized and the depoliticized. We're going to start moving ahead and building what must be built. And I urge you all to do what I do and be patient. I'm trying to get myself to be patient. Like I said, I'm going out and running. I'm trying to keep my energy up. I'm frustrated, stuck at home. I'm doing a lot of writing, trying to pass the time. I know you're frustrated. I am also frustrated. But we're going to get out of this, folks. We're going to move ahead. We are going to build the Center for Political Innovation. This spring, we are going to have a kick-ass conference in New York City. We are going to have an event on the West Coast as well. And I actually want folks that are not on the West Coast and are not in the East Coast, people throughout the heartland of America, to start thinking about what the Center for Political Innovation event in your area could be like. Seriously. Folks, it is far more productive to have an event in a local area than it is to have an event, in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles. I spoke at a community college in upstate New York one time. And I'll tell you, there were posters all over the campus, and I was the talk of that campus for a week beforehand and a week afterwards, right? And I remember I brought some leaders of the political group I was in to a college that I was attending in Ohio. And again, they were the talk of the campus for the week before, for the week afterwards, that, in areas where you don't have Center for Political Innovation, CPI, thank you, Herb Bryant, in areas where you don't have, big political activists, speaking all the time and such, to have an event is very powerful. And that I know all over the country, places like Illinois, places like Kansas, places like Nebraska, places like Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, there's going to be socialist clubs, which a lot of you are going to be in. Bring me to your campus. Let's have a Center for Political Innovation event at the campus. If you can get me some funding to cover my expenses, that would be ideal. If not, the money that we're raising for CPI might be able to cover it. Let's have an event on your campus. Let's have an event in your neighborhood, in your community. Let's have an event about socialism. And not just me talking, but let's bring some musicians to play some songs, to play some of that socialist folk music. Let's bring some local poets and entertainers. Let's bring some people involved in some struggles in the community, whether it's labor or anti-police brutality. Let's build some powerful socialist educational events across the United States. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it, folks. Let's do it. I am ready to go from coast to coast, to go to little towns and colleges. I am ready to meet you, the people that watch this every week. I am ready to build something. So as we start heading toward society coming back to life, as we start envisioning what the post-pandemic world will look like, I'm urging you to start envisioning what the CPI, Center for Political Innovation event in your neighborhood will look like. In your community college, in your university, in your neighborhood, what will it look like? Went by Israel, 2008 financial crash. What was the one that went by before that? So I say Israel, 2008 financial crash. The other one went by way fast. Israel, 2008 financial crash. What was the one that went by before that? There was one that went by before that. What was it? I want to see it again so I can. It was fast. It looked like an interesting one, but it went by really fast. What was it? I want to write that one down because somebody gave me a super chat and I don't want it to be missed. When Russia and China became socialist, was the intention to transition to communism. Okay, all right. Okay, cool. But folks, let's start thinking. We have to build the Center for Political Innovation. We have to have a left where you're allowed to talk about stuff. We have to have educational materials. We have to get people back away from this base level political understanding of who's racist and sexist this week and understand the problem of capitalism, the economics of imperialism, all these things that you're not allowed to talk about in the woke circles. We need to educate people. We need people to become ideological. We need people to understand the history of socialism. We need people to understand why socialism does in fact work, what imperialism really is, the economic base of all of this. We need people to understand all this stuff. And no one's going to do it. We can sit around waiting for somebody else to do it. No one's going to do it. We have to do this. This is the task we have been assigned by history. We have to make this happen. And I'm frustrated by this pandemic, and so are you. So are you. We're all frustrated by this, right? This hotel was beautiful. It was booked. And I hope it appears that they're keeping my down payment, and that's where we're going to have the event this spring. But we are going to build amazing events, amazing conferences. We are going to build a socialist community. In the wake of this pandemic, in the wake of the wreckage of capitalism, we will build a powerful socialist education organization, and we are going to build anti-imperialism and genuine Marxism among the American people. We're going to do it. We are going to do it. We are going to get people to understand the world and how it works. Alrighty, folks. So let's start hammering out these super chats. Someone asked about the red salute in the Paris Commune. Well, you can Google the fist salute. It's common knowledge that it comes from the Paris Commune. You can look it up. And in many histories of the Paris Commune, they talk about the fist salute and its origins. And many histories of the Paris Commune talk about that. It's interesting because the communist song, the Internationale, also comes from the Paris Commune. But originally, it didn't have its own tune. Originally the Internationale did not have its own tune. It was sung to the tune of La Marseillaise, the French national anthem. But the Internationale. Arise, ye prisoners of starvation. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For justice thunders condemnation. A better world's in birth. No more traditions chains shall bind us. Arise, ye slaves, no more in thrall. The earth shall rise on new foundations. We have been naught, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict. Let all stand in their place. The international working class shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict. Let all stand in their place. The international proletariat shall be the human race. Yes, that comes from the Paris Commune. That comes from the Paris Commune. Sorry if I'm a big nerd for learning all those lyrics, but some of us actually care about this shit. Some of us don't think this is just the latest trendy liberal cause. Why is my union non-radicalized? Whoa, went by way too fast. Why is my union non-radicalized? Union non-radicalized. What was the rest of it? Union non-radicalized. Why is my someone repeat it, please? I want to see it. Why is my union non-radicalized? What was the super chat? Also, we have a bunch of fascists in our rank and file not politically engaged. Fascists in our rank and file not politically engaged. Alrighty. I will address that for sure. So yeah, look up, any history of the Paris Commune generally tells that story. I am 32 years old, the person who asked my age. I'm 32 years old. I don't know what, are you going to steal my identity or something, or figure out my birthday based on some calculation? I don't know. I'm 32 years old. I am 32 years old. Angola. Brief overview of Angola. Well, Angola was colonized by Portugal. It was colonized by Portugal, and there was a liberation struggle in Angola. Right? The main resistance group to the Western imperialists was the MPLA, the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola. 1975, you'll remember that there was a revolution in Portugal. The fascist government of Portugal was toppled in mass protests and such. And when that happened, at that point, the colonies of Portugal got their independence. So Angola was granted its independence. The MPLA became the new government. However, the United States and China were arming a group called UNITA, the Union for the Total Liberation of Angola. And UNITA was armed at first by China as a Maoist group, but also covertly by the CIA. And in the 80s, they dropped the Maoist stuff, and they just became full-on CIA, adherents of Western capitalism, led by Jonas Savimbi. And there was 27 years of civil war. And this very oil-rich African country suffered for 27 years of civil war because the MPLA government, the Marxist government, was besieged by the U.S.-backed UNITA group. China has apologized for their initial support for UNITA, also, keep that in mind. Cuba developed a very close relationship with the government of Angola. Now, they sent soldiers there and such to support them. At one point, there was an attempted military coup inside of the MPLA, and it wasn't exactly clear. It was like a CIA-backed guy was trying to overthrow the main faction of the MPLA, but he was trying to say he was more radical, or he was almost like a Trotskyist, and it was pretty ugly, and there was like a big, like two-line struggle inside the MPLA. After that ended, it wasn't until 2002 that you finally had peace in Angola. Then at that point, the MPLA launched what they called Angola Starts Now, which was a huge economic development project. And it was big. And they worked with China, and they started building stuff, and they started selling oil, and the oil prices went up. And so Angola had oil, and the capital of Angola became very, very prosperous. A lot of people were raised out of poverty. A lot of people got their first job, the first time they'd actually had a job in their lives. Angola got its own cell phone company. Railroads were constructed. I mean, bridges were built across the country. Angola still has a bunch of landmines from the war, from the Civil War. They started getting rid of the landmines. Good stuff was happening. More recently, you remember the oil price drop. So there was a fight within the MPLA, the ruling party. So now there's a guy who's pretty pro-Western and neoliberal who's in there, but it's still the MPLA. I mean, he hasn't fully dismantled the government that came out of the Civil War and such. So it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. But that's a quick overview of the history of Angola. But basically Angola is a country that has a state-run economy. It's aligned with Russia and China, and it's been subject to horrendous. The imperialists have been ruthless to Angola. I mean, 27 years of civil war, folks. Can you imagine 27 years? 27 years of civil war. How many hundreds of thousands of people killed because the imperialists were determined to keep Angola poor. And it's the same thing. They do this in oil-rich countries all over the world. They keep them poor. They keep the people killing each other. They keep the people impoverished. Well, now China and Russia and the MPLA have started to move in the direction of raising people out of poverty. Angola, in the early years of this century, in the early years of the 21st century, had one of the highest economic growth rates in the world. No country ever had a higher GDP growth rate because of the economic policies that were being implemented with the state-run economy. And they still are very close to Cuba. The relationship between Angola and Cuba didn't end. However, the leadership, I think their most recent president is not a particularly good guy. Okay, he's a little more pro-Western and all of that. And there's been a big effort to persecute people like Isabel dos Santos. Isabel dos Santos, she's the richest woman in Africa, but she's been pretty viciously targeted because she believes in socialism. And she's been enforcing environmental laws. She refused to privatize the natural gas. She stood up to the oil companies, the American oil companies. I haven't been following it as much as I used to. I was very, very on top of it when they first ousted Isabel dos Santos. I read about it and immediately thought something's not right here. But I haven't been following it as closely as I have. But I need to get back on top of it. But yes, I would like to write more about Angola. At one point, I was considering writing a book about Angola, but I'm not sure I'm going to do that at this point. But I follow it closely. I mean, it needs to be followed. And the way they demonize Isabel dos Santos, it's like they always tell history the opposite of how it is. I mean, the free market people have been working with Western companies to keep Angola poor. Isabel dos Santos was using the state-run industries to raise people out of poverty, to do all kinds of great stuff to empower people. And yet, because they try to tell you that she's the corrupt one. I mean, they always do this. They always do this. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I've talked about it before, and you can watch my videos about Angola. The MPLA is the party, it's the socialist party that led Angola out of colonialism, led Angola through 27 years of civil war, and it presided over, when it finally got peace, presided over some real economic miracles. And the imperialists would like to dismantle all of that, and that's not good. Alrighty. I'm not quite sure, does the person who super chatted me about Chile and the crisis and internationalism want to repeat? Explain how the liberal that sex work is in fact a work of exclusive exploitation. Can someone repeat the Chile super chat? So I didn't quite get it. Maybe they can clarify what they meant. I just want to repeat that because you super chatted me. You deserve an answer. But can you repeat it so I can really see what you're getting at? I know Chile, they had a lot of issues with austerity there. There's been a big anti-austerity protest movement in Chile in recent years. I mean, we know about what happened in Chile a long time ago with Pinochet and all of that. More recently, there's been a huge militant working class movement there opposing austerity. The people of Chile are fighting back against austerity and imperialism. They've suffered under dictatorship. Michelle Bachelet was kind of a social democrat leader who was in there for a while, but she wasn't really a Marxist. Okay, well, all right. Mike Pompeo was in Sudan this week. Yeah, Sudan. I mean, look at Sudan, right? The United States has broken it up. South Sudan, horrendous. It's just downright horrendous what's happened. And yeah, Mike Pompeo's there. Of course, Mike Pompeo is, he's all about regime change. He's all about escalating international tensions. Max Blumenthal, Management of Savagery. I absolutely love that book. It is a great book, and it talks about the U.S. government and its support for Wahhabi extremists in Syria, in Libya. And how, basically, throughout this war on terror, the U.S. government hasn't been fighting the terrorists. It's been fighting the people who are fighting the terrorists, right? Look at it. Look at the facts, right? I mean, we didn't overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia, where all the hijackers and Al-Qaeda started. We overthrew the government of Iraq that had been fighting against Al-Qaeda. We didn't overthrow, we've been fighting against the government of Syria. We overthrew the government of Libya. I mean, all over the Middle East, we've been fighting the enemies of the terrorists, not terrorism. Our U.S. government, it's funny. One way you can tell that they're not going to solve a problem is when they declare war on a problem, right? The war on drugs. War on drugs. Great one. Right? Did drug use go away? No. Did the drug gangs go away? No. In fact, the CIA in the 80s was working with drug gangs in Central America, South America, Afghanistan. The war on drugs has not gotten rid of drugs. It's been a war on working families, right? In fact, drug use and the drug problem in the United States has expanded since the war on drugs. Have we gotten rid of drugs? No. War on terror, great example. Terrorism. Has terrorist groups gotten weaker since the war on terror started? No. There are more terrorists around the world, right? Terrorist groups have spread, ISIS, all of that, right? Instead, it hasn't been a war on terror. It's been a war against independent, socialist, and nationalist governments that fight terrorism. It's been a war to destabilize the Middle East and make terrorism. I mean, war on poverty. Is there more poverty? Is there poverty in the United States now? Of course, right? Have they gotten rid of poverty? No. I mean, it's when the U.S. government declares war on something, that's a guarantee it's going to be around for a lot longer, right? If the U.S. government declares war on you, don't worry, right? If the U.S. government started a war on Caleb tomorrow, I'd go, oh boy, well, I'm safe. Don't worry about it. They're fighting a war on me. I'm pretty well safe, right? Drug dealers, war on drugs, lots of drug dealers. War on terror, lots of terrorists, right? War on poverty, lots of poverty. So if the U.S. government declares war on you, don't worry too much. Don't worry too much. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, they don't wage wars on terrorism. They don't wage wars on poverty. They don't wage wars on drugs. They wage wars against working people. They wage wars against independent governments. And they often do it under the guise of fighting something that people would like to actually get rid of. Unrest in North and South America and the need for internationalism. Follow up the current crisis in Chile, its relationship to the AFP system, and neoliberalism. Okay, well, I don't know enough about the current crisis in Chile and the AFP system, but I thank you for repeating it, the super chat. You didn't have to repeat it like a second time. You could have just put it in the text, but thank you. I'll have to do some research on that. As far as South America is concerned, Bolivia, a horrendous situation, U.S. coup government, Venezuela has defeated a number of coup attempts. In Central America, the Sandinista government of Nicaragua has been withstanding all kinds of efforts to destabilize them. Meanwhile, in places like Honduras and Guatemala, the results of coronavirus have been horrendous. So, Colombia, very vicious government there backed up by the United States, all kinds of brutal repression. The people of Bolivia would like to elect Evo Morales and the socialist government back into power. The USA is trying to prevent that, and the Áñez coup government is preventing democracy. So a lot of struggles going on that continent, suffering amid coronavirus as well. Okay. Alrighty. Domestic workers, proletarians. Well, actually, Marx talks about that, right? So, all right, Marxism, the way it understands the worker, it refers to a worker that is involved in production, right? It refers to workers on the assembly line in a factory, right? And then that's how he lays out his formulas for exploitation, etc. But in Marx's writing, he talks about how 50% of the working class people in Britain were not involved in production. They were people who, they cleaned houses like domestic workers. They were, managing the stables on the estates. They cared for the children. If you sell your labor power, you're a proletarian. However, right, not every proletarian is involved in production, right? And that is a point that Marx dwells into quite a bit, right? They're still proletarians technically, but they are not producing surplus value in the creation of a product, right? That's a point that Marx makes, right? Not everyone who sells their labor power is necessarily involved in production, right? And that people that are, it gets complicated, right? The general way the proletarian class is explained is that the proletarian class are those who sell their labor power in order to survive. Well, that includes domestic workers, that includes nannies, housekeepers, that includes, the service sector, and technically that includes bosses, managers, right? Because managers, right, I mean, their job is managing. But that's where it gets tricky, right? If you get technical about it, there are some Marxists who will say, well, those managers, see, their pay is based on, it's like they get a chunk of the surplus value, right? And their job is to drive the other workers to produce. So they're technically not proletarians. They're another class that you call agents, right? They're talking about managers. Well, they're not workers, they're agents. I'm not sure I agree with that. They're talking about police, right? Now, police, are they involved in production? No. Are they selling their labor power? Sure, but their labor power is enforcing the will of the state. So are they proletarians? Some people would say no, they're agents. I would say, I don't know. Right? And that Marxists argue about these kind of things. These debates go on, right? Are managers workers? Well, they're driving other workers to produce. They're managing the exploitation of other workers. So are they exploited? Right? Police, they're obviously not involved in production, but they're, fulfilling a service that maintains the profit system, protecting private property. Are they workers? Some people maintain they're not. But I think everyone is very clear that domestic workers, they're working class. They sell their labor in order to survive. They're just not involved in production, right? And so they don't fit the classic Marxist production. They're not producing surplus value, so to speak, but they're selling their labor power. So in my viewpoint, they're workers. But Marx does talk about this. This actually comes up in Capital, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I read it. All right, Israel, 2008 financial crisis. Well, Israel is deeply tied in with, oh, geez, I just dropped my pen into my drink. Ugh. Israel is heavily tied into Western capitalism. Israel gets a huge amount of aid from the U.S. government. Business with Israel is very essential. And, Israel is very much part of the Western capitalist system. One thing I will add is that neoliberalism, the economic, management style that became very popular, like austerity rule, that, the people connected to it are very pro-Israel, right? Milton Friedman went around Israel giving speeches about how, Jewish people shouldn't support socialism, is what he argued. Interestingly, there are a lot of Jewish people who support socialism still today, but especially during the, in the lead up to World War II. It was all over the world. You had a lot of Jewish communists, Jewish socialists. That was, it was a big current. And even still today, there's a lot of Jewish people that are involved in revolutionary and socialist activism. But Milton Friedman, who was one of the big thinkers of neoliberalism, went around giving speeches saying the opposite. Ayn Rand said that the first cause she ever donated to was Israel. And that it's interesting because Israel has kind of evolved. When Israel started out, it presented itself almost like it was going to be a big socialist commune in the desert, right? With the kibbutz movement and, the Labor Party, Haganah was the big current, and Israel was presenting itself as being very, very socialist. Now, Israel is more closely aligned with the more neoliberal free market right wing, right? Netanyahu is in with Trump, and Sheldon Adelson here in the United States. So it's complicated, right? We have to remember, though, Israel is also very complicated, right? The Likud party, which is the right-wing party in Israel, which is very free market oriented in its policies. It's nowhere near as free market as the United States is. They have things like free healthcare and such for Israelis, but they don't represent the entire Israeli population, right? There are some much more liberal folks in Israel, and there is still more social democracy in Israel in terms of, it's very complicated. But yeah, I guess that's what the person was asking about, and Israel and the United States and Western capitalism, they're all very closely tied in together. I believe there was a military general who said something like Israel was like an unsinkable battleship for the United States in the Middle East. Israel's very much tied in with the Western capitalist system, no question about it. So, yeah, Russia and China, and yes, yeah, at the time, and still, not in Russia, right? In Russia, they don't believe in communism anymore. They don't believe in Marxism. The Communist Party does, but the ruling government does not. But in China, and at the time in the Soviet Union, at the time of the Russian Revolution, even up until the end, the goal was eventually to build communism. Let's talk about this. What is the difference between capitalism and communism? What's the difference, right? What is the difference? What is the difference between capitalism and socialism? What is the difference in socialism and communism? Capitalism is a system where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good. I'm sorry. Wow. Starting again. Capitalism is a system where the banks and the factories, and the major industries, and the oil wells, and the means of transportation, and the centers of economic power are owned privately by capitalists. And those private capitalists operate them in order to advance their own profits. The means of production are privately owned and functioning according to whatever is profitable for those who own them. That's capitalism. Socialism is a system in which the opposite is the case, where the banks, factories, major industries, oil wells, centers of economic power are owned by society as a whole, or controlled by society as a whole, and forced to work in the interest of society as a whole. Profits are no longer in command. That's the difference between capitalism and socialism. Marx referred to socialism as the first stage of communism, and then Marx referred to what he called the higher stage of communism. The higher stage of communism was the idea that after you had a rationally, centrally planned economy, after there was no longer a contradiction between abundance and poverty, right? After there was a situation where abundance no longer created poverty, when the means of production rationally operated and growth was allowed to expand, and growth did not create poverty, when people didn't get poorer because technology advanced, when people could become wealthier and society could become wealthier, as a rationally controlled economy raised people out of poverty, eliminated scarcity, as abundance came to exist, that gradually the need for a state would fade away, right? That the state goes around enforcing private property. But in a world with such vast material abundance, the idea is that the need for a state would gradually fade away because people would have so much stuff, and there would be so much abundance that the need for any, central government authority, the need for wages, right? The need for, even regular employment would fade away. That people would just live in luxury and there would be peace on earth. And that is the ultimate goal. That is the final stage of communism, a world with no oppression, a world with really no coercion, right? Created by vast material abundance. That's the ultimate goal of communism, right? Now, that can only happen after the entire world has been socialist for a long time. Think about it. Technology has to vastly increase. That's communism. And the eventual goal of the Chinese Communist Party, of the Soviet Communist Party, Cuban Communist Party, is to achieve that ultimate vision of a stateless, classless world of vast material abundance. But it's pretty far off. The only way to even approach that goal is to have an economy that is rationally organized, where growth and efficiency and technological advancement doesn't create poverty. You need a rationally planned economy. The most important book, I think, in the history of the Marxist movement is Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Friedrich Engels. Most important book in the history of Marxism, because he talks about all of this. Marxism is not worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives still function according to profits, right? Marxism is not a welfare state. The government gives people free stuff. I think the government should give more people stuff. Sure. But no. Marxism is the idea that we should have a rationally planned economy so human growth and creativity can be unleashed and technology can expand and all of society grows wealthier in the process and we gradually move toward a world of vast material abundance. And that final stage, that higher stage of communism is the ultimate goal. Now, unfortunately, in the late Stalin years in the USSR, there was some confusion about this. In the late Stalin years of the USSR, people said things to the effect of, like, Russia was entering the early stages of communism. Are Maoists the new Trotskyists, and how do you deal with them? It's funny, because that's related to what I'm about to say, actually. But, they said things, like in the final years of Stalin's life, you'll read pro-Soviet publications, and they would say things like, the Soviet Union is already on the brink of entering the early stages of communism. Bullshit. It wasn't, okay? The Soviet Union was socialist, but it was fighting for its life to maintain its socialism. So that, and there was some confusion about that. There was some confusion about what communism was. Because if you look at, the Soviet Union in the 1950s, were they anywhere near communism? No. They had a socialist society, fully socialist society, rationally planned economy. Were they anywhere near communism? No. They had a very heavy state. They had scarcity. Socialism has an employer and employee relationship, Richard Wolff said, but communism is everyone has a voice in the organization. That's not exactly right. But yeah, I mean, in the Soviet Union, they had a very big state, and they had scarcity. It was not a society of vast material abundance, right? Far less scarcity than they had under the Tsar, but they still had a level of scarcity. I mean, they raised productivity, increased steel production, they electrified the place. They still had scarcity compared to the West, compared to what they should have had. Communism is based on vast material abundance. Communism is based on so much stuff existing that nobody has really a need to hoard stuff, right? So there was confusion about what communism is, right? Then you'll remember that Stalin died, Khrushchev came to power, Khrushchev and China had a falling out. So in China, you had China arguing that they were on the road to communism. And they said the Soviet Union were revisionists. They were not advancing on the road to communism anymore, but China was. And during the Cultural Revolution in China, China declared that China was the closest thing to full communism that had ever existed. And this was in the late 1960s and 70s. And that's completely wrong. And, you asked about Maoists being the new Trotskyists. China kind of dropped this idea that communism was based on material abundance. Communism just meant you were doing things in the most pure way. I believe the phrase that the Gang of Four used in China is that they said that you could, quote, transition to a higher stage in poverty, meaning that China could go from socialism to full communism in poverty, right? And that this notion that communism is a world of vast material abundance created by rational organization of the means of production was lost. And a lot of the new left, they got away from that. Communism became about changing people's minds, changing people's attitudes. It's this new liberated way of being. The economic basis of Marxism got faded away. And a lot of the neo-Maoists do that. The RCP does that. You read the RCP's literature. The ultimate goal of communism is just when everyone's been taught to be good, basically. When everyone, and it's a lot of the Maoist stuff, and even some of the admirers of the Soviet Union and Stalin, they kind of miss the economic understanding of communism. Communism is not, communism is a world of vast material abundance, and so much abundance existing that the need for a state and coercion fades away. That's what Marx says, that's what Frederick Engels says. But a lot of left elements have lost that understanding. They think that communism is just like behaviorism. If we have socialism for so long, people will learn to be good and then we can have communism. No, my friend. As long as there's scarcity, people are going to be hoarding things. A great example. If there's a bread line, right, if there's a shortage of food, you're going to have to ration the food. You can't just have everyone take all the food they want, right? As long as there is scarcity in society, there's going to be class divisions of some kind. There's going to be inequalities of some kind. And there's going to be a need for some kind of state to enforce, who gets what. The road to eliminating the state is vast material abundance. There's an economic basis for this. And That's what a lot of these left folks have gotten, and that's why I need to form the Center for Political Innovation. People need to understand this. Someone said, Richard Wolff said something. I deeply admire Richard Wolff. The moments that I've been able to spend with him around the office and such have been a treat. He's a brilliant man. I've learned a huge amount from him. He encouraged me. I had never read Theories of Surplus Value because my training had been only to read the stuff published in Marx's lifetime. And Theories of Surplus Value was published after Marx's death. Karl Kautsky assembled it from Marx's notebooks. And so I had never read Theories of Surplus Value. But he encouraged me. He said, you really ought to read Theories of Surplus Value and learn how Marx viewed other economists. And I read Theories of Surplus Value. And I was blown away. I learned about the Marxist analysis of Malthus and Malthusianism. I learned the Marxist analysis of Adam Smith and the role that Adam Smith played. It was great. I mean, it was, I'm really glad I read Theories of Surplus Value. I did that because of Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff told me to. He's a great man, and every moment that I spend with Richard Wolff, which is not very many, I've seen him a few times, it's really an honor. I've always learned something from him. So a deep admiration for that individual, nothing but deep admiration for him. But let me add that, right, the exploitation of the worker by the capitalist in order to make profits, right, that's capitalism. Right? And the idea is when the factories are owned by the people, collectively, by society, people will be brought into the administration. And that existed in a lot of socialist countries. You had a working class representative. You had elected people that ran the factory and organized it. That existed. One thing in Cuba, they talk about how in Cuba, in many factories, the manager gets paid less than the people on the assembly line. Think about it, right? A lot of people would like to be a manager. Not many people would like to be on the assembly line. So the state central planners say, okay, we want to incentivize more people to be assembly line workers. So the person who's the manager gets paid less because more people want that job. It's actually kind of brilliant, and it makes sense. In a socialist society, it makes sense that a manager would get paid less than a factory assembly line worker. However, in Western capitalism, that would never happen. The manager always gets paid more because he's the boss, and he's driving people to produce for the boss, and it's complicated. So, but yeah, the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world in which people, Marx said that communism was from each according to his own ability and to each according to his needs, meaning people can just do what they want to do and take what they want. So much abundance in society, so little human labor required, technology has advanced so much that people can just do what they feel like doing and take what they want. And there's no danger that people are going to take too much because there's no need for them to do that. And there's no danger that people are going to do too little because people will work, because there'll be so little work necessary because of technology. People will work just to entertain themselves, for something to do so they don't get bored, right? It's a far different stage of human civilization. It's an ideal. It is the ultimate conclusion of the class struggle, right? Marx called it the end of history. I don't like that phrase, the end of history, because time obviously doesn't end. Things will keep happening. So, but, that is the higher stage of communism. And no one has gotten anywhere near it. We've had the very beginnings of socialism around the world. China, Vietnam, Cuba, Venezuela, countries like that have had the very beginnings of socialism. They have laid the basis of a state-run, centrally planned economy. There have been some experiments with factory autonomy. In Yugoslavia, they pushed factory autonomy. In China, for a while, they were doing stuff with 3-in-1 combinations and stuff. But ultimately, we've just seen the very beginnings of socialism. We haven't even seen socialism become the dominant system in the world yet. So, that higher stage of communism, that ultimate goal of the class struggle, is very far away. And that, unfortunately, Maoists and Trotskyists and a lot of people get very confused about what it means. And the Gang of Four, when they said that China in the 70s, when most of the country didn't have electricity and didn't have running water, that was as close as humanity had ever gotten. It was the greatest advance toward communism. That's ridiculous. But again, if you lose the economics of what communism and socialism mean, that might start to make sense. Okay. Union. Someone said that their union has non-radicalized a bunch of fascists in our rank and file that are not politically engaged. Well, I guess this points to the problem, right? Is that, many unions are not political. Many unions are not political, right? They talk about business unionism. You talk about Samuel Gompers, right? That many unions, and especially labor bureaucrats, they don't want to take the risk of getting political. They just want to, make sure the dues money keeps coming in, maybe recruit some more members, get some more dues money. But, that there's a long tradition of non-politicized unions. And, the labor bureaucracy and revolutionary working class elements have often fought against each other. There's a whole history of that, right? I mean, why do you think there's an AFL-CIO? Why do you think that now whenever you join any union in the United States, you have to sign something that says you will not practice dual unionism? Well, what was dual unionism? Google what that was about. Learn the history there, right? The socialist movement, yes, it built the labor unions, but they always were battling against what they called the labor bureaucracy of the elements in the labor leadership, the misleaders of labor who didn't believe in that. And that Marx talked about the class struggle. This is very fascinating. He talked about the class struggle necessitating that labor unions not become simply concerned with the needs of an individual workplace, but becoming organizing centers for the entire class. And Marx said that out of necessity, the unions would have to become, centers of an entire working class movement, taking up community struggles like police brutality or conditions in the neighborhood and rents and all that. That labor unions would be forced by the capitalists. The capitalists would make it so the unions were so isolated that the only way unions could really get strength was by reaching out to the community and becoming organizing centers of the whole class. And that's what Marx wrote about, and that has largely happened. As you've seen in the United States, as the labor bureaucracy has gotten pushed on harder by the bosses, they've had to move in that direction. Now they're doing it in a very opportunistic way, basically supporting the Democratic Party and doing a lot of PR stuff that doesn't actually improve people's lives. Plenty of criticism to be made of the labor bureaucracy in the United States. I mean, many people who've worked in the labor movement can tell you they've been stabbed in the back and they've been mistreated, and I believe everything they're saying. And trust me, the little bit of activism I did in terms of labor stuff in Cleveland, not much. My main focus was police brutality. But when I was in Cleveland doing activism, I did stuff with the labor folks. And I can tell you, some of those folks are very, very slimy, and they will stab you in the back. But, at the same time, right, as labor unions have gotten attacked, they've been forced to become more involved in community struggles, right? And that's what Marx predicted. That is what Marx predicted. He predicted that as unions would get attacked, and you can even talk about this. I mean, it ebbs and flows, but the fact that the British Labour Party, right? I mean, why did they form a Labour Party? They didn't want to, but it was kind of forced on the labor movement because they were under attack, and both of the major parties were against them. But there was a labor upsurge, and the Labour Party was formed because workers felt a need to have their own party. Now, the Labour Party in the United States, Labour Party of Australia, I mean, these parties are certainly not revolutionary parties anymore. And were they ever even fully revolutionary or not? Were they just kind of, a gesture? Well, there's different analysis of that. But regardless, right? I mean, yes, labor unions, and even just in a community struggle, there's a strike. And it's just the workers in that factory. And nobody in the neighborhood supports them, they're going to lose, right? When strikes have support and become victorious is when they have support in the community, when they have support in the town, in the city, local politicians, people in the community. That's when striking workers are victorious. When there's a whole community that supports them, they win. And when it's just an isolated struggle, it's something that nobody in the neighborhood knows about, when the union has done no community outreach, they tend to lose. And that reinforces what Marx says, that for labor unions to survive, they need to become centers of the entire working class. I think that's what the person asking the question was getting at. Okay, folks, I think that is all of the super chats. Is there anything else? Anything else? Anything else people want to talk about? Anything else people want to talk about? Speak now or forever hold your question, or hold it until the next live. And keep in mind, this Saturday we will be doing a patrons-only live. So if you want to be involved, become a patron. Down below, you can become a patron, sign up on Patreon. We'll be doing a live just for patrons, just for supporters. But yes, anything else before we end here? Anything else? Anything else? All right. On that note, we will conclude. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And remember, folks, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Have a good night. Thanks.